Hello, this video is going to take a look at approaches to policy making. This is the third video in a series looking at agri-food, politics, and policy. So, this is in the context of agriculture and food. And we're going to be comparing four different approaches that include structural policy changes, cultural social norm changes, individualistic cognitive changes, and technological changes, all representing competing ways to solve problems using policy or using non-policy solutions. Policies are about making rules and spelling out the rules of the game. When we say social structure in sociology, we mean there's a set of rules that guide social behavior, and central to that, of course, are political rules, policies, put in place laws. We have to follow the law. So we need to ask who is benefiting, who is losing, and of course who's writing the rules. That's another important question. But of course, within the context of agri-food, agribusinesses have become a political juggernaut. An example of that was demonstrated by Monsanto in the state of Vermont, where there was a state law passed requiring the labeling of bovine growth hormone on milk. So if farmers were using this hormone in order to increase milk production, the state of Vermont said, okay, that's fine, but you have to at least put a label on the milk so people know what they're getting. We'd rather have consumers be educated and aware of what they're buying. And there was concerns that maybe this hormone was having some deleterious side effects in terms of health, especially like initiating puberty at an early age for young women and so forth. So Monsanto sued the state of Vermont because they said this is an impingement on our free speech rights, and it creates undue fear in consumers that there's something wrong with BGH, and they claim that there was no scientific evidence to support those claims. And so even though a state passed a law that simply required labeling, mind you, it wasn't to ban BGH, it was just simply, to label products that included this hormone. Monsanto challenged the ruling in federal court and was able to defeat the state law. So, many people looked at that and said, okay, so this shows us that corporations have become more powerful than even state governments, right? So if you needed evidence that Peter Evans is right, in the United States, the market is king and government is subservient, the cases like that support that contention. So, as we solve different types of issues, we have concerns about hormones in milk, for instance. One way to do that is through structural solutions, creating laws that require labeling or even, prohibit the use of certain practices to protect consumers. Those, if they pass, are the most effective because they change the rules, right? It makes it illegal to violate those regulations. But that's why they're fought so fiercely by corporations who don't want to be overly regulated, because they fear that will cut into profitability. So they tend to encourage other types of solutions like cognitive solutions, trying to convince consumers to make their own choices, right? So it's a very individualistic model. Many would say it's not very effective, but the idea is, you can't have a law, but you can try to change people's minds one at a time. That can be effective, but it's very slow, and a lot of times it is ineffectual because it's so slow and everybody has a different opinion, and it's so easy. There's so much misinformation and disinformation circulated that there's a lot of just misinformed people out there. So how do you overcome that? And that's one of the issues that structural solutions avoid, because you don't need to convince everybody. They simply have to follow the rules. Businesses often like technological solutions because they also don't threaten their business model as much. So, if, for instance, there's concerns about bovine growth hormone, well, maybe there's some kind of antidote to that, some kind of treatment, some sort of application or chemical that can be added that reduces the threats, those kinds of things. Well, businesses are often open to those kinds of changes because they can continue business as usual without making any, sacrifices. Cultural solutions are sort of structural without law, so making changes to social norms, right? So, you know, in any society can implement changes in social norms, but it's not that easy. It's easier said than done. Um, so maybe it just becomes that a particular culture decides it's no longer going to buy milk. It's going to shift its diet to a non-dairy diet. That would be one way to solve the issue of the growth hormone as well. It sounds pretty extreme, but you got to recognize that as a possibility. And sometimes cultural norms can be very effective at solving problems. We can see that, for instance, when we look at the example of tobacco and smoking, where the norms have been changing. Whereas it used to be very normal for people to smoke in public, smoke in restaurants, smoke in grocery stores, smoke on airplanes. Now, gradually, those norms have been changing. Of course, there have also been structural changes. It's become illegal to smoke indoors most places. So there's been a combination of structural change and cultural change. But you have to also recognize historically that the beginning approaches to solving the problem of tobacco use were cognitive. So businesses would say, well, let the consumer decide if they want to take the risks of tobacco. Don't make it illegal, don't ban smoking, but just try to give consumers the information and let them decide if they want to smoke or chew tobacco or whatever they do. The other one is technological solutions. So, if people want to quit smoking, one of the technological solutions are the cessation products that are out there, like nicotine gum or lozenges that people can buy that, they contain nicotine, but they're not as harmful as cigarettes or other types of tobacco products. So those are all it's a good example because it highlights the four key approaches to solving social problems. And not all of these are political solutions. Some are cultural, some are individualistic, some are technological. Uh, so in the context of agri-food, if we take those same four approaches, let's say we want to come up with a way to improve small farm productivity. So we want to make small farms more viable. That's important to, say, the localist movement. Locavores wish to have a more locally oriented agri-food system. Okay, so one way to do that is just to convince people individualistically, give them the information about the benefits of small farm production, the harms of large agribusinesses, and then let them decide if they want to buy products from small farms. Right? And that sounds a lot like the same kind of approach used initially, with smoking, right? Just give people the information and let them decide. Now that isn't always bad, but as mentioned previously, a lot of times there's misinformation, there's disinformation. Agribusinesses can be very misleading. They can represent themselves as supportive of small farms, for instance, when nothing could be further from the truth. But they create commercials, run a propaganda campaign, and so consumers feel more comfortable buying products from large agribusinesses because they sort of feel like, well, maybe it's a corporation, but they support small farmers. So you get the point. You know, this could be cultural. It could be, I think you do see some regions of the United States where the norms towards supporting local foods are stronger. Uh, Maybe more rural regions, more progressive regions, where there's more rejection of, corporate food, corporate agriculture, and corporate food. Some of this could be technological. Okay, so we could help small farms be more productive technologically so that they actually may become more competitive with corporate farms, perhaps giving them solar greenhouses or something like that. Okay, that could be effective, but a lot of times technological solutions take resources that small farms don't necessarily have. So unless you're going to support that with another structural solution, like you have to write a bill that provides funding for small farms to buy solar greenhouses. Right? But now we've incorporated a structural solution, and it's just hard to avoid that. One of the most effective ways to create social change is through good policy. So making policies that subsidize small farm production is probably going to be the most effective thing we can do. So then we don't have to worry about trying to convince people one by one about the benefits of small farm production. We just make it the law. And a lot of times what happens is when the law changes, we see cultural change come in its wake, right? We saw that with smoking. So as smoking began to be banned in more and more spaces, no longer allowed to smoke in public, culture began to adapt. People began to expect socially uh, a new kind of behavior, and that would be not smoking, right? In the case of agri-food choices, culturally, people might come to expect that their food comes from a local source, right? So those are all things that could happen. All right, thanks.